What do you do on Sundays?
We talk about Cate Blanchett, the acting, the costumes, the awards, but mostly the Blanchett of it all.
I'm not acting.
You think this is a love affair?
I saw you, Erica. Meeting in the middle.
This is Sundays with Cate, and I'm your host, Murtada Elfadl. Welcome to Sundays with Cate. This is your host, Murtada Elfadl. After many months' absence, the podcast is back for a final season. We will discuss all the Cate Blanchett films we haven't gotten to so far. And in addition, Cate has decided to give us not one, but two movies this holiday season. I will be discussing Don't Look Up in a couple of weeks, give people a chance to get to it on Netflix. But today, I'm very excited to delve into Nightmare Alley, which opened in the US this Friday and will hopefully be available in other places, so everybody listening will have access to it. And for this conversation, I'm very excited to welcome for the first time on Sundays with Cate, film critic Leila Latif. Leila, welcome.
Hi, excited to be here to talk about one of the greats. But yes, that's just one of the greats with one of the greats.
Thank you so much, Leila.
And what an amazing time in Cate Blanchett's career. Like those two films that you mentioned, like it could not be more different.
Yes, very, very different. And for them to come out at the same time, I think COVID had something to do with this because Nightmare Alley started shooting before. It was probably scheduled for last year, but it is fun to have both of them at the same time. And like you said, such different roles and such different movies.
Yeah. It's always so nice where there's that tradition where actresses used to kind of disappear at the age of 40. And then like nowadays you get someone like a Cate Blanchett who just seems to be doing her best work.
Yes.
And, later on in her career. I just think it's so amazing when you think of actresses just like 10, 20 years ago or before where they sort of hit 40 and they'd, kind of disappear and their careers would be over. And now she's in her early 50s and like, not only is she doing such amazing work, but she's still, an object of desire in a lot of these films, which is just, it's very encouraging.
Yeah, I love that you said object of desire because I was thinking about, Meryl Streep is maybe 20 years, 25 years older than Cate, something like that. But I remember this interview she gave that when she turned 40, for 2 years, all the roles she was offered were witches. And so she stopped working a while until she was able to find other roles. But then, so it's great that Cate is at 50 finding these roles, like to your point, where in both these movies she plays a very seductive, desirable woman, and her age is not an issue at all. In fact, it's not mentioned how old neither of these characters are.
I believe she's actually older than her leading men.
Yes,
in both, which is.
In both cases,
must be horrifying for Leonardo DiCaprio. We know he's not interested normally, like post 23, is he?
Yeah, I know, right?
Everyone's looking great, regardless.
Yeah, and yes, everything looks great. Everyone looks great, and everything in this movie looks great. Like one of the things that really sort of jumps at you in Nightmare Alley is that the look is great. The production design, the cinematography, the costumes, everything is so beautiful and gorgeous and lush to look at. But before we delve deep, let me just set up the movie. So the film is directed by Guillermo del Toro, who wrote the screenplay with Kim Morgan, which they both adapted from the novel by William Lindsay Gresham. It is about an ambitious carny, that's Bradley Cooper, who has a talent for manipulating people. I'm getting this from IMDb.
About right.
Yes. So IMDb says an ambitious carny with a talent for manipulating people with a few well-chosen words hooks up with a female psychiatrist, that's our Cate, who is even more dangerous than he is. And so the story is basically two parts. The first part takes place in a carnival. That's where Bradley Cooper as Stan Carlisle appears out of nowhere. He has a shady past because it's the film starts with him sort of trying to bury a corpse. No, this is not a spoiler. This happens literally in the first second of the movie.
Yeah.
So, and then he goes and integrates himself into this carnival that has a lot of characters, from Toni Collette to Willem Dafoe to David Strathairn to Rooney Mara. They're all people who work at the carnival doing different tricks, whether they read minds, whether they do other tricks. Like I think Rooney Mara's character does some stuff with electricity. She basically electrocutes herself in a chair. And so he goes there, he learns the tricks of the trade. He becomes what they call a mentalist, which is he read minds. And that's where Toni Collette and her husband, played by David Strathairn, sort of teach him the trade. He has an affair with Toni Collette. Then he moves on up the echelon of society in Buffalo. And that's where he meets Cate Blanchett as this dangerous psychologist. She's all noir, femme fatale, red lips, blonde hair. Works. She looks amazing. And sort of they team up to swindle richer, more powerful people in the second half of the film.
God, it's amazing. You got through so much. And I was just like, yeah, I was thinking that actually this film was a very like unhurried pacing, but you're right. A lot happens because you said, well, that's like the first hour.
Yeah.
You got like a whole other act and a bit to go.
Yeah, it is. And it's so one of the things that I don't like when people see a movie like, it had its world's premiere. It invited all the media in New York and in LA. They were doing all these simultaneous screenings at the same time. And everybody who came out of those screenings, which played at the same time, just said, oh, the first half is slow and the second half is great once Cate appears, which, as a Cate Blanchett fan, I love that once she appears, the movie goes into second gear. But also when I saw the movie myself 2 days later, I was struck by like the second part doesn't work if the slower paced maybe, but still important, doesn't set up the characters to get that. So what did you think, Leila?
I think there was, I think I probably agree with you. Whilst I was watching it, I was feeling that like, oh my goodness, this half is very slow. And I had read some of the reactions coming out. So I was like, we've been here an hour and I've heard that Cate Blanchett is in this film and she's yet to appear. But then when it came to kind of the final and the payoff and the kind of way that everything I don't want to spoil, but it sort of turns out for like our major characters. I think actually that first slower half of like character building like really pays off. Like particularly I'd say in the film's like last final minutes. And I think if you didn't have that like understanding of like Bradley Cooper's character and like the strange the strange Oedipal relationship he gets into with Toni Collette and David. Is it David Strathairn? I never know how to pronounce it.
I think it's Strathairn. Is how.
Okay, Strathairn. Well, because he sort of like ends up in a very strange thing where they're almost like his parents, but then he's having an affair with her, and he kind of wants to like take over from him. And I was like, well, I think all of that sort of meant that when he crumbles and when you see his weaknesses and the way that he's been able to manipulate and the sort of things in him that Cate Blanchett's character, because she's so much cleverer than him, is able to like spot, it kind of made sense. And it wasn't just like generic guy gets too ambitious, like this was actually quite specific to him. I'm a big fan. When I was watching it, I probably had some of those mean reactions in it about like, oh God, yeah, this is slow. But then when it ended and I kept thinking about it, I was like, that was great. But they are right in that she's the best thing in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. She's definitely the best thing in it. And the movie does get slightly more, a little bit more exciting when she's on, just because I think it's the performance, but it's also maybe the part that she plays in the story is just the one that feels more urgent than the first part, which is more setup. But to the point that you were making, if you do not get the setup, you don't get the payoff. So if we're talking about Nightmare Alley and sort of like a Del Toro film, like I think this movie it's a very, very bleak film, and it's a bleak noir, even bleaker than most noirs. And I think, but it also fits within his obsessions. He's always obsessed with monsters, with evil, and how evil is cultivated and ruins lives and all of that. And this is exactly about that, but also the monsters. This time, there is no supernatural element, so all the monsters are human. And most of these characters, except for, I think, Rooney Mara's Molly, are monsters in a way or another. Like everybody who's on screen has scars, has a past, is driven by something dark and sinister.
Yeah, God, very true. And I think what I love about my favorite Del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth, is like the idea that also there's like a wider evil in the world happening as well. So whilst in that film, you know, the war is actually going on, this is kind of in between the wars, and it's like everybody's still traumatized by World War One, and you know that like, and World War Two kind of starts to happen, I think, in the second half. But like this idea of like that there is like really widespread misery beyond like the, you know, beyond the edges of this film as well. And you kind of see it creep in. You see like all these, you know, all the alcoholism and all the like misery from like many of the side characters. But yeah, I think it was really like, it was really, really wonderful.
Yeah.
And I think it's been accused a bit of style over substance, but I think like the substance of it was amazing. And Cate Blanchett's character is like the pinnacle of both. Like she's so fascinating and she's so stylish.
So let's start there. So I think she is so stylish and the film is so stylish, but I also think I think Cate throughout her career has been giving us these hints of like she will be the perfect femme fatale in a noir. Like I'm thinking of Steven Soderbergh's The Good German, which was in black and white, set in the 40s, but that movie ultimately is not a noir, doesn't sort of sell that. It's more like a Casablanca retreat, but just thinking of her performance, she was given us kind of like Marlene Dietrich in that a little bit because she was German and had a German accent. So I guess being reductive, but she gave us that little bit there. And I think in Carol, it's not a noir at all. Carol is a love story melodrama, but just the look, which is, I think, it's very close to how she looks in Nightmare Alley, like the red lipstick that never leaves her lips, the very blonde hair that's just exactly doesn't move. It's always perfect and in the right place, no matter where she turns. And so finally, all of that promise of these other movies, I think, pays off in Nightmare Alley, and she is the femme fatale in a noir that I think we've been waiting for.
I agree. And I feel like this is like a real fantastic marriage of director and actor. And I hope that they like do a lot more work together again, because it was one of those things where I feel that like his sort of, you know, intelligence and style, but like kind of eeriness and like slight otherworldliness like really goes well with a lot of the stuff that she is extremely good at. And I would actually say like Ron Perlman weirdly actually kind of has that a bit. And I thought, I mean, he doesn't have much to do in this, but it's like, you know, like perfectly good. But you know, like some people that feel plucked from a fairy tale, and I think she's got that, and I hope that it's going to happen again. I know Guillermo del Toro isn't normally the person that works with the same actor 20 times in a row, aside from Ron Perlman, but like, you know, I'd still love to see it.
Yeah, I'd love to see it too. And she's so perfect in this part. I'm thinking of this very funny tweet from Kyle Buchanan from the New York Times. He said that that Cate treats the film's, I'm just quoting his tweet, she treats the film's eye-popping production design like it was all custom made for her to slink on. She'll slink on couches, on desks, on walls, on Bradley Cooper, even on air, which I thought was very funny.
I like this idea of like slink, because I think there's like a funny thing with like everything that she does in this film has got like a weird texture to it. Like even the way that she'll slowly move an arm or a leg, it's almost like she's going through liquid or something, but it doesn't feel too much. It's actually just like very like, it sort of goes with all of like the massive, you know, the very like heightened Art Deco styling of it all, which is so gorgeous, and she just seems like perfectly in sync with it. But you really feel that Del Toro is like just delighted with everything that's happening with her. Like he'll spend so much time on her mouth or like the shadow across a cheekbone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of her performance takes place in the character's office.
Hmm.
And that office, to your point about Art Deco, is just so gorgeous. And the like, I need to come with more, with more adjectives rather than gorgeous, but it just looks so great. And there is, all the couches are sort of all tilted to the side a little bit so that she can slink down them or go up them, and it's
Yeah.
so funny, like the way even when she sits straight, then she will cross her legs on an angle, so it's never straight, and it's always like, oh, so are you telling us that Lilith is just lying all the time with all this body language? There is something
Yeah.
there.
I think you might be onto something. Like, it feels that considered. It feels like every kind of placement of a hand is like that level of like deliberate. You feel that they spent, even like the little gun that she has, you feel like they spent weeks deciding on what this gun would be. And there's probably
Yeah.
some like incredible symbolism that I'm not getting, but you just feel that there is a lot of like care and thought in every moment of it.
Yeah, she just looks so glamorous. And glamour is something that's associated with her. So, if you like Cate Blanchett being glamorous on screen, this is definitely the film for that.
Yeah, she rarely lets us down in that regard. Even when she's kind of not playing the most glamorous character, we get the red carpets,
Yeah,
don't we?
totally. I wanted to also talk to you a little bit about Bradley Cooper playing the Stan character. So
Mhm.
I think I enjoyed this performance. He is very reticent at the beginning. I think at the beginning of the film, because he's absorbing everything from around him, from Willem Dafoe, from Toni Collette, from David Strathairn. All those characters are sort of teaching him how to behave in a carnival, and he's just absorbing. Like in the first half, he is not as commanding, but I think it fits the character. But once he starts, and he gets into his power in the second half, and he
Mhm.
meets up with Kate, especially in those scenes with her where they're trying to read each other and they're trying to sort of like figure each other out. I think his performance goes on on the next gear, and he
Yeah.
becomes more alluring on screen. What did you think of Bradley?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things that, I mean, I don't play tennis, but I hear that like when you're playing tennis with a better partner, like you become a better tennis player. And I mean, my one complaint about this film is that I think that Rooney Mara really isn't very good. And um, like when you go, especially in the second half, when you're cutting between his scenes with Kate and his scenes with Rooney Mara, you really
Mhm.
feel that, like, as much as I do think he is a strong actor, like he needs that scene partner, he needs that like chemistry, because
Mhm.
it was much flatter with Rooney, where it's just like,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, I'm just ruthless and I'm kind of interested in money and I'm a bit angry and a bit kind of, short tempered. And then with Kate, it would be like, oh my God, and the sins of my father and the things that I've done and the trauma of this and my ambition and the class issues, and it was like, it like just became so much more complicated and so
Mhm.
much more interesting. And because like fundamentally this film is about his like, because he is the protagonist. So it's like Kate, just when he's with Kate, like there just seemed to be way more motive to him.
Yeah, and I agree with you that the Rooney Mara kind of doesn't shine as much as other people in this cast, because I think the character is such a wet blanket. Like,
Mm.
she has no, even though I don't know if you saw the 1947 film version of this.
Yeah, I
They
have.
so I think they have sort of amped up that character a little bit. Like, he or she makes some decisions, where in the 1947 version she made no decisions at all. She just sort of followed Stan around. Here, like, there is, later in the film, she tries to leave him when things get tougher, and when she sees
Yeah.
that it might not be, things might not work out for them, she tries to leave, and so she sort of has a little bit more agency than in the 1947 film. But it's still kind of like, it's a very reactive
Mm.
character, and I enjoyed the way she, like, at the beginning, with all the stuff that's happening at the carnival, there was, a lot of dramatic things, and she had sort of a calming presence with just a very warm smile. But that's basically the extent of the performance.
Pretty much. There was a sort of piece of dialogue about 2/3 of the way in, and I'm sure I'll get it wrong, but her character says something along the lines of like, "Oh, I've never, had sex, well, not consensually either way," and I was like, "Oh, like that's the most horrific thing I've ever heard." And she just sort of like drops it like it's nothing, and I was just like, "No, but this is, so shocking and so horrible." And then also there's the dichotomy, because like when you see her out of costume, she's always a high buttoned shirt and and a cardigan and very modest. And then when she's on stage, she's essentially wearing a sequin bikini, and she almost gets arrested for immodesty. And I just thought there was like something quite interesting to explore there about someone who maybe like performed sexiness in a way because of like a traumatic thing that they'd been through, and how like women were treated at a time where people were quite abusive towards them, but then also like very quick to judge them for essentially just doing their jobs and being a performer. But it's like it never scratched it. We actually just kind of got a couple of lines and it didn't go there. So I think it's not necessarily about giving a character more screen time to fix the fact that they're pretty thin.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rooney Mara is always a very internal actor, and maybe with this, which was this screenplay, and the way the character is written, it just stops at beguiling and doesn't go beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a little boring when you have kind of the young female moral compass.
Yeah. Yeah. She has the most boring character, I have to say, even though she has probably the second most screen time after Bradley Cooper. But she, and that brings me to sort of Toni Collette, who her part in the original was played by Joan Blondell, who was kind of sold as the star of that version. And here, I don't know what happened, but I just felt she was nowhere on screen, even though she has a couple of scenes, but and she has one where Xena, she's sort of a carnival mind reader, where she reads the mind of a woman in the audience, and things are going wrong because her husband got drunk and can't give her the clues that she relies on, and that's it. I think the part has been cut somewhat because she just doesn't make an impression.
I wouldn't be surprised, because it felt like it was building to more, and she actually just ended up quite. I mean, I did enjoy that scene that you described where she's kind of doing the mind reading, but aside from that, she just seemed to kind of appear every now and again and be like, "Be careful," like heed my warning, and it's like, okay, like, and it's sort of. Maybe it's because it's like the source material of just being like a different time, but I also didn't fully understand how you could be this like mentalist who sort of duped people into believing in supernatural things, but then be so interested in like and reliant upon tarot cards. I think that's possible, but it's just like I think we needed a bit more in order to kind of like bridge those things of just like, okay, so you don't believe in seances, but you do believe in this, and like.
So Leila, what you're saying is that even though this movie is 2.5 hours long, we needed another 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
No, we needed less Mara and more Colette.
Okay, got it.
You know what I could have done with way less of? Enoch, the baby in the jar. They'd cut to him about 55 times. And I was like, I get it. It's horrible.
Yes. And yes, I agree with you. That was kind of a little too much, that cutaway to that. I think Del Toro just loved that image and he couldn't help himself.
Yeah, but like by the halfway point, I'm just like, is Enoch like somehow behind this all? Like, what is it? Why do we keep returning to him?
Yeah. So on the flip side of like Rooney Mara having a big part but not doing much with it, I think there is a small cameo of maybe 2 scenes by Mary Steenburgen, and we won't spoil it because it's a surprise. But if you haven't seen this movie yet, look out for Mary Steenburgen, and if you've seen it, just what we're talking about. It was delicious.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah. I saw her when we were, in the press screenings, you get like almost like a screensaver of like the poster of the film. And like there's like 18 characters or something written, and I spotted Mary Steenburgen and we're like, oh, I didn't like, I wouldn't guess she'd be in this. Like more used to doing like sitcoms, but she's great.
Yeah,
She's so great.
She's so great. And it's funny because one of the press things that I got says the cast is great and there's 2 Oscar winners in it. And like, as a follower of Oscar, I'm like, who are the 2 Oscar winners? Because I know Bradley Cooper didn't win an Oscar, nor did Rooney Mara. Who besides Cate won an Oscar? And, I had to go all the way down. I'm like, oh, it's Mary Steenburgen, who's won an Oscar way back in the 70s. So.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I would have guessed it would have been Richard Jenkins, just because that feels like the type of thing he would have done, but I guess he hasn't.
He's a multiple nominee, but he hasn't won yet.
Fair enough.
So it's Cate and Mary Steenburgen. We talked a little bit about the 1947 version, and I think this is darker, bleaker, I would say better version of this novel.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think there was in the 1947 version, which I do think is a very good film. It's sort of not as extreme a journey. I think they soften it slightly. I think the place where certainly the protagonist ends up is entirely convincing in this version, and in the previous version feels like, would he? And I think that what happens is that like Cate is all the more transfixing as a presence, but also rather than them just do kind of corruption by like a million paper cuts about like, oh, he's just kind of getting worse and worse and worse, this film has got like quite big breaks about like, well, this is the point where he just kind of loses all sense of this. Oh, and then like again, and then you kind of see the way, and then but I think it's very, very like convincingly bleak, and there's like a sense much more of almost like an ancient Greek fate with this film, where it's like this is almost always where he would have been. And from frame 1, when you see him at the beginning, you realize that's the path, that this is where it's going to go.
Leila, you just wrote a review of Nightmare Alley for Little White Lies, right?
Yeah. No, that was one of the ones. I've got a very good relationship with my editors. So a lot of the time I'll just kind of bags things. So when the first images came out, and there was an image of, I think it's Cate slinking on a kind of sofa with a cigarette, and like Bradley Cooper and Shadow standing at her feet. And I just immediately sent 47 WhatsApps. And it's been just like, I get to do this one, guys, right? I get to do this one. This one's mine to review. And like, thankfully they let me have it.
And so tell our listeners where they can find your work besides Little White Lies.
So I'm at the AV Club. I'm at Total Film, which is bought in print. And then like coming up, I'm covering Sundance for Sight and Sound, which they'll be publishing online throughout the festival in Jan.
Oh, that's fantastic. So with Sundays with Cate, we don't usually worry about spoilers because we do movies that have been out for years. But this is the first time that I have to worry about spoilers. So listeners, Leila and I are going to discuss a couple of things. So if you worry about spoilers and don't want to be spoiled about Nightmare Alley, skip a few minutes and then you can listen to the rest of the podcast. But for the next couple of minutes, we will be spoiling some things. So Leila, you were talking about the difference between the 47 and this version, and how the arc of Stan is bleaker in this one.
Oh my goodness, it's so incredibly bleak. So the final few minutes, earlier in the film, we have Willem Dafoe who explains how you get what they call a geek. There's somebody who is just like a kind of wretched, kind of barely present human being who they get to kind of performatively bite the heads off chickens and eat snakes for a very like sadistic crowd. And Willem Dafoe explains that you essentially find someone who's an addict, and then you get them all hooked on, you sort of become the person that gives them alcohol with a little opium in it. And you convince them that first it's a performance, but eventually it will like become who they are.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that Bradley Cooper in the first, when this is being to explain to him, sort of like winces and just like, oh, this is disgusting, and like, oh, you know, how horrible. Mm-hmm. But he stays, he continues working with these people and stuff. He doesn't actually have that much empathy for this person. And then that's that's what he ends up doing. And the final scene is Tim Blake Nelson kind of recruiting him as the newest geek to the carnival. And him sort of, it's almost like one of those sobbing cries, being just like, yeah, like I can't remember how he phrases it. Something like,
I think he says something like, yes, I know exactly what that is and I'm ready for it, or something like that. And then he does sort of a laugh cry. I think it's his best moment in the movie, because it's all in that laugh cry and sort of his face as he realizes how low he has gotten and what he's ready to do to survive. And you're right, that doesn't happen in the 47 version, because I think with the code or with the studio, they couldn't do this bleak ending, which is in the book. But this sort of makes Bradley Cooper's performance just so it's his best moment on screen in this film. And also it makes all that setup pay off, because the ending is so strong, and it ends on him, just his face, telling us, the tragedy of this character, just with his face. And it makes that whole first hour just so important.
Yeah, I agree. And it makes all of the time where Cate Blanchett was like unpicking the sort of ego of this man, the arrogance of this man, and how he, sorry, it wasn't Cate Blanchett, her character. Although I believe she has those skills. I think she could do it.
She probably does. Lilith Ritter.
Yeah, because it is quite a bit of time of this film where they're kind of like, oh, well, what is your relationship with alcohol? Why are you so proud that you don't drink it? What is it with your father? And like, also he's essentially, I mean, it's ambiguous, but I think he purposefully kills his father figure at the carnival in order to like take his place, which is so Oedipal.
Yeah, totally. And those scenes between Cate where she's like sort of goading him into telling her the truth or telling her what has happened to him, and he's like also trying to read her and trying to tell her about her life, and saying things like, "You're not that hard to read, lady." I think those scenes were the highlight for me, because to what you were saying earlier about the tennis match, it was delicious to watch.
I mean, there was one moment which I think was so kind of like delicious, but also like not overplayed, where the moment where she says to him like, "Oh, but I love you," and he's like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh no, I overplayed it. Doesn't matter. I've got all like, it's too late for you to. It doesn't matter if you've like guessed my evil plan."
Yeah,
like that moment where he realizes that he's like truly screwed, and this has all been a performance from her.
Yeah, it is such a great moment for both of them. And I think the one thing also, spoiler, that I really loved, difference between this version and the 47 version, is that the resolution of the psychiatrist's role is slightly different between the two films. And what I loved about this movie, in how it sort of divulges the background of Lilith Ritter and sort of how she's involved with the Richard Jenkins character. We don't get that sort of monologue where a character will just tell us their backstory. Like, it's sort of like we get what happened, like it's given to us in doses. I won't spoil everything, but it's given to us in doses. And then suddenly when she's talking, you realize why she wanted him to basically take revenge for her on Richard Jenkins. And she doesn't tell us everything that happened between them.
And that wound is so fascinating to me. Like, what could it have been that's the wound? Do you think was that a surgery following a thing, or do you think that was like because it's so and the annoying thing is it's like, because everything in Guillermo del Toro is so beautiful, even when it's grotesque. It was a gorgeous scar.
It is a beautiful scar, yeah. I think because Richard Jenkins says, I hurt girls, and I think maybe he used torture during sex or some sort of something like that. I mean, they never tell us, but that's kind of what I gleaned.
I kind of expected when she was because I assumed she was going to unveil something like really horrible when she kind of opened her jacket, and it almost looks like a cardiovascular scar. I assumed it would kind of be lower down and there'd be a suggestion of he was like maybe forcing, I don't know, like hysterectomies or abortion, like something kind of like darkly sexual on his former lovers. But God, it could be
that, yeah.
It could.
Yeah.
But Richard Jenkins' character for me, and it's strange because this film was very long, but I would have liked to know a little bit more about what he does to girls. And I think it could have been 2 sentences.
We needed some clarity a little bit on that. Even though I just love that Cate doesn't sort of tell us how she met him or whatever, or Lilith doesn't tell us how she met him or what happened between them. I enjoyed that part, but yes, you're right. Maybe he should have told us what he did.
I think it would have made the kind of horrifically violent end that he comes to be a little bit more satisfying.
Yeah,
because you almost feel sorry for him at many points.
Yeah, and this is also sort of a different role for Richard Jenkins. He always plays sort of older, nicer man, and he's very evil in this. I can't remember a time when he was very evil. He is the most evil of all these evil people, really.
Yeah, it's fair. Beautiful gardens there.
Yeah. Did you want to say any other spoilers, or can we end the spoiler a bit?
No, just that, like, as someone who really misses David Fincher's Mindhunter, it was very nice to see that actor again playing Richard Jenkins' bodyguard, loyal bodyguard.
Holt McNally, yes, yeah,
Yes, Holt like that. He was great. And as someone who is very, very haunted by the face smashing scene with the bottle in Pan's Labyrinth, I feel like Del Toro heard that and was like, we're going to put 2 in this film.
Yes, I like that. So, listeners, here ends the spoiler portion of the podcast. One other thing, it's not a spoiler per se, but, it's early in the film, so I think I can talk about it. There is full frontal nudity. It's a blink and you'll miss it. You can see Bradley Cooper's penis. And I sort of, was a friend of mine after we watched this movie. He was adamant that there was no full frontal nudity. And I was like, no, there is. You just weren't paying attention.
There was.
Yeah. So Leila agrees.
There was. Yes. And I'm very in favor of this because I think that too long there's been so much pressure on all of the actresses to bear all. And I think it's very refreshing to see a film that has full frontal nudity from, a huge Hollywood star in the main role. And we don't see anything of, we don't see any female nudity at all. I don't think.
Not at all. No, there isn't. I mean, Lilith, Cate opens her shirt, but you don't really see much except the scar. That's it.
Yeah. And this is definitely a pattern. Like, you think of Power of the Dog, same thing. And Scenes from a Marriage, and to a degree Dune, and I like the sort of pendulum going the other way.
Yeah, I agree, and I love it too, and I think that's why I wanted to mention it. So yeah, a big star like Bradley Cooper definitely did it. It's about time, like you said. Yeah.
Too many women have been like, when you think of like what someone like a Sharon Stone went through from that split second of like nudity that she had in Indecent Proposal, and like your friend didn't even notice that this happened.
Yes, I know, right? I think they were just not paying attention, because it's also like there is a movement from Toni Colette that sort of guides you to where you need to look. So
yeah.
So there is intentionality in how it was shot.
But it's not even like that the internet is going crazy, like people being like, oh my God, you won't believe what you see in this film. Like we don't treat men as harshly.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. I don't think anybody is going to bat an eyelash at Bradley Cooper for what he did in this film. One question I had for you, Leila, is that I love noir films, and noir films are always sort of like shadowy and dark. This movie's, it's definitely a noir story, and it's as bleak as noirs are usually at. And it's a story about crime and about evil people and all of that. So it fits the noir description. But I think it's so lush in its cinematography. The colors pop. And I sort of struggled a little bit with that choice. I enjoyed it because it's great to look at. But I'm not so sure that it was maybe the right choice for this very bleak story.
Interesting. I quite like that, because I felt that this was, like we talk a lot about like auteurship and like these directors that have just this very specific vision that they come to. So I felt that it was like, this was a Del Toro film that looked like a Del Toro film and felt like, all of the what he normally does, but what he got was that bleak, dark heart of the film noir and of the anti-hero and of like the cursed landscape and the dark fates that below you. So like, yeah, I agree that it wasn't your typical film noir, but you know, it was kind of, it still worked for me. I can see maybe for as a purist, it might not be as interesting, but you know, kind of Del Toro's gonna Del Toro.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like, you know, a bit like if we had like a Wes Anderson,
Yeah.
Nightmare Alley, like what would that be?
Oh yeah, I don't know. I don't think Wes Anderson would be able to direct a story like
A lot
this.
of very depressed, wealthy people.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about, yeah, it's definitely, in the look, you can definitely see it's a Del Toro film. So yeah. So I think because of the movie setting in the 1940s and because it's noir, I think there's sort of a competition between critics to compare, because Cate is playing this femme fatale, to compare her to actresses of the golden age of Hollywood, especially the 1940s. Like if you skim reviews, you can read names from Jean Turney to Veronica Lake to Barbara Stanwyck to even somebody like Elizabeth Scott, who I actually had to Google to find who she is, but she was a noir actress in the 1940s. Did Cate look or performance remind you of any particular actress from the golden age of Hollywood?
I think like Barbara Stanwyck was probably the one that got closest to me, because I think Barbara Stanwyck always had like such an incredible like sense of intelligence with like the characters that she played. But I still felt that like, as much as this is like theoretically 1940 or around then, like because Del Toro's lens is so like specific and so him, it almost didn't remind me that much of like Del, you know, it almost felt like ahistorical. Like I felt like this was kind of almost something that was like taking place like out of time and place, because it also becomes so like ludicrous, because like the psychiatrist's office is more decorated than a ballroom, and like,
and it's
even
so
like
huge.
Yeah, so it was so heightened that like it almost like it didn't, like she didn't necessarily remind me of the golden age of Hollywood, because it was kind of dialed up and so like stylized in a modern way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the look might be reminiscent of the 40s because they had to be period specific, but I think the performance is more modern. It's not a performance of that era at all. Like I think there is a lot of, yes, it's a very physical performance, and like we talked earlier about how she glides and slinks around, but it's also like there is a lot of to what you said, intelligence, and I think a lot of a bit of reticence. Like she is an actor who doesn't always show all her cards. Like I think she maybe shows you 10 of the if the character, let's make a math out of it, if the character has 10 cards, she'll only show you 8 and lets the audience figure out the rest for themselves, which is what I love about watching her.
Oh yeah, that's so perfectly put. Like, yeah, no, and I think people use enigma wrong in a way. But this is like a truly enigmatic character and an enigmatic performance within an enigmatic character, that kind of, just when you think you've got her figured out, it's she's 3 steps ahead of you, and you're right, you haven't seen the final 2 cards, which is delicious. I keep coming back to that word of like, it's delicious.
Yeah, it is. I love it.
And it's great because I think it works with what we're saying, when the slinking, the slow moving, the kind of physical nature of the performance, and that like this character is also performing.
Yeah, she is performing, because most of the time she's on screen, she is playing a trick on Stan Carlisle, on the Bradley Cooper character. Yeah.
Yes, and also I would say it's clearly not the first time she's done something like this. I mean, with I haven't really thought about this until now, but when it comes to the Scar and Richard Jenkins' character, and the fact that she kind of knows this information about him, like that could clearly be another film.
Yeah, I know, right? Totally. Maybe Del Toro can do it. So, Leila, what would you rank this within Del Toro's filmography?
It doesn't break Pan's Labyrinth to me. I'd probably put it at the same point as Shape of Water, which is a film that I really likes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think that there's so many films, and weirdly, there's one that keeps coming to mind called what was it called? I Care a Lot, that came out last year with like Rosamund Pike. And I remember complaining to people about like, but this is like just style over substance. And then something like this comes along, and I just really appreciate it's so much style, but there's also some substance there. Like,
Yeah.
you know, Rosamund Pike's hair was fantastic in that film. Cate Blanchett looks amazing in this. You know, Rooney Mara styling incredible, but like there is a dark, bleak, you know, kind of timeless ancient Greek myth that's horrifying at the middle of this that I was just can't stop thinking about, really.
Yeah. And, you know, when I first watched this movie, especially the last sort of, I don't know, 45, 40, 30, I don't know time, but when the revelations about the past of these characters start to unravel and, you know, people start getting hurt really bad, I just felt like I wanted, if it wasn't, if I was watching this at home, I would definitely have pressed stop because I felt overwhelmed. But I was at a screening and I couldn't leave because I had to, of course, finish the film. And I was just like, I really want to leave. And I felt like the movie's like kind of just coming at me with so much things that I did not want to see. And I think that's a strength of it. And it's a film that I have been thinking about. Like I've seen it, I think about 2 weeks ago now. And it's a movie that I have been thinking about a lot since then. Just to your point about how much substance there is. It's a bleak story, but it's also a story that has such undertones. And it does what a movie should do, is that, for me at least, it keeps you thinking about it even after you've stopped watching it and, you know, maybe written about it like you did.
Yeah, I had a great walk to the Tube with two of my critic friends, Clarice Lowry and Sophie Monks Kaufman. And we ended up even walking to a further Tube stop because we wanted to keep talking about it.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah. So I think it's up there for me too, with Del Toro. As far as with Cate, I think I need to think about it a little bit because she obviously has done many more movies than Del Toro. And I think like my top, it's definitely not Carol Blue Jasmine, which I think are her best performances. But I think it's definitely up there. Like if there's like a, I don't know, a top 10, it might come in.
Yeah. I mean, like what? Maybe above that. Her Marvel villainess was so great.
Thor Ragnarok,
Yes, Thor Ragnarok. I would say maybe kind of around there, around Notes of a Scandal, maybe kind of that. You know, but can you imagine? Like most people would dream of that, and we're talking of this as her second tier.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know. I'm very partial to Notes on a Scandal, so I put this.
Me too.
Yeah, I love that film so much. But that is, I always say that the only movie where I think Cate did not give the best performance in the movie is Notes on a Scandal, because I think Judi Dench is so amazing in that film, and she is definitely the best performance in it.
Yeah, well, that is a very strong recommendation for a film. I might have to rewatch that again. I remember reading that book and thinking, when they announced the film, just thinking like, oh, how could you possibly, like, who would want to, watch that? And then 5 minutes in, I was just like, oh, this is why I'm not a great director, because I can't see the film when I look at the source material.
Yeah, I know. So,
but she's such an unlikable character, more so in the book.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah. I
think so. Judi Dench's character, she's horrible, and you end up feeling quite sorry for. And I think the film, is more balanced, where just everyone's deeply flawed.
Yeah, very deeply flawed. But Judi Dench is amazing in it. Maybe I should. I'm taking a little break over the holidays, and I'm trying to get some books. Maybe that's a book I should read.
That's good.
Yeah. So Leila, I want to close with a few questions about Cate. But before we do that, is there anything about Nightmare Alley that you wanted to touch on that we haven't?
No, not really. I think we kind of went through it all. Just, I suppose the thing that made me happiest about it was it felt like a great director with a really specific vision was just allowed to make the film that he wanted to make.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a film that he had to take a lot of notes on or do a load of like reshoots to like please a studio and stuff.
Yeah. And there is a little sort of, I think, a beautiful collaboration love story because behind this film, because he wrote the screenplay with Kim Morgan, who is a film critic and a film historian. And just a few weeks ago, they announced that they are married. So.
Oh, really? Oh, how nice.
Yes.
Oh, that's made me very happy.
Yeah. So out of all this bleakness came this beautiful love story somehow.
Oh, how lovely. Because he seems like such a lovely man. And you hear a terrible story about how his father was kidnapped. And like, I think he's not had an easy time. So, I love it when people find love later in life.
Yes, it's so nice, right? It's so great. I love it too. So before we go, Leila, I want to ask you about Cate Blanchett. Do you remember the first time you saw Cate Blanchett in a film and what you thought?
I'm thinking it probably was Elizabeth, which I remember that kind of being so distinct because I also didn't know much about Elizabeth as a queen beyond that she was kind of around the Shakespeare. Shakespeare was kind of around the same time. So yes, and this kind of like incredibly like regal presence. And I remember very much the kind of end of that film where she sort of becomes the Virgin Queen, and it's like her entire like body language changes and she puts on the white makeup and she gets the hair, and it's like it's almost like an origin story of Elizabeth.
Totally. It is. And that sort of transformation at the end is so memorable. And I think that's why she became a star, because she was able to do a whole journey in that movie from a teenage Elizabeth to that image of Elizabeth that even if you have a cursory knowledge of history, that image.
Yeah. So yeah, and she's hasn't frequently disappointed me since. Suppose that maybe that Richard Linklater film. So that was I think that was more on him.
I think that was more on him. I don't think he found that right tone for it, because that is a book I read, and the book is so funny, but somehow Richard Linklater, I think, was not interested in the satire, and I don't know. Yeah, that movie.
I normally love Richard Linklater, but like that was kind of befuddling.
Yeah, it was. I have two more questions for you. So Cate is this very respected actor, but is there a time where you think she was underrated? Like maybe perhaps a performance or a film you really like that you don't hear other people talk about as much?
I liked her Katharine Hepburn in The Aviator very much. And I think at the time that was well appreciated, but I think it's been a bit forgotten. Like Aviator as a film, because I think, I don't know that The Aviator was like one of Scorsese's best, but I think she in it is so like fantastic that perhaps with like memory has like just made people remember like, did you remember when like Leonardo DiCaprio was Howard Hughes, and they forget that like no, but Cate Blanchett is the amazing Katharine Hepburn.
Yeah, I like that performance too. Yeah. It's very hard to sort of play somebody who everybody knows and has watched hours and hours of them, right? And I think it's such a challenge, and she does it so great.
And there's so many kind of bad impersonations in that film. I mean, not as significant a role as hers, but do you remember there's like Gwen Stefani is in that someone, and
Jean Harlow.
Yes, and Kate Beckinsale is Ava Gardner, and it's just like doesn't quite work, and they should have like some missteps, but it's a shame because somebody just do one of those YouTube compilations that's just her from that.
I am sure one of our listeners will be able to do that. So if you do a compilation of just Cate Blanchett as Katharine Hepburn in The Aviator, let us know. And my final question to you, what is your favorite Cate Blanchett performance? It can't be Nightmare Alley. No, I'm just kidding. If it is, it is.
Oh, Craig, that is tough. I'm going to go back to Elizabeth, as much as there's been so many that I love. And in particular, I do like Blue Jasmine a lot. But I think there's always something really exciting when you go back now. And often if I'm writing a profile of an actor and you watch the kind of first big star-making turn and you see why it was that this person broke out of all of the hundreds of actors. And so I'm going to give it to her because I think it's so, her and Elizabeth, just because I think like she had something so special and something so undeniable from like minute one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's a fantastic note to end on. Leila, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking with me today. Before we go, let our listeners know where they can find you online so they can follow your work.
Oh, great. So I'm on Hopelessly Addicted to Twitter. So Leila, Leila _Latif, where I post everything that I do. And then aside from that, I'm AV Club, Total Film, Little White Lies, Sight and Sound. God, where else? Cousin, The Guardian. Like, yeah, I kind of, I'm in a lot of different places. Oh, and I edit a feminist horror journal called The Final Girls, which is like really good fun as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. And this is our first episode of the final season of Sundays with Cate. So tune in every Sunday where we will drop new episodes. This is episode 1. Next Sunday, the 26th, is the movie you've all been waiting for a long time. I'm doing a series of episodes on that film, but the first will be the Christmas episode. It's Carol time. And you can find me on Twitter at me_says and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Sundays with Cate. And until then, thank you for listening.